Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Today we're going to do Volume 2 of T2F, Tough to Find. And these are all from my initial list of things I was like, oh yeah, that's going to be one to track down. And of course, as I'm pulling stuff, I'm seeing so much more. I'm like, oh, that was a tough one to find. So if people still enjoy this series, we'll kind of keep making episodes going forward for a little bit anyway. There's some fun stuff out there that I didn't really know how to present some of it. How am I going to show people this record? And a lot of that stuff falls into this category. A lot of it was tough to find stuff from the major labels that never got many reissues, if at all. A lot of times these records didn't catch on for one reason or another. Something else was happening in jazz, either at the label or somewhere else in jazz. So a record got ignored. And almost universally, there's great playing on everything. You don't, I've said this before, you don't get on a great jazz label in the 50s and 60s without having some serious ability. And so success isn't based on ability as much as it is on timing, luck, who you know, who you played with, where you came from, what doors were open to you. You know, there had to be hundreds, if not thousands, of incredible jazz men that never even made it into a recording studio, let alone one of the major labels that we remember and talk about today. You know, that goes for the white and the black players. Not every great white player made it to Pacific Records or Contemporary Records or Bethlehem and got to track. It's kind of a creme de la creme. The guys that Woody Herman and Benny Goodman and Count Basie and Duke Ellington recruited, Art Blakey, those were great proving grounds for talent to record. They often let the musicians decide who was the elite out there and then recognize that talent within the confines of those bands, and then that's how most guys got their start. Very few guys seem to come out of nowhere. We're playing some local small town, all of a sudden got a recording contract to make records. Everybody plays with everybody at some time. And the White Cats had bands they play with, which I learned a lot of this during the sax episodes I made on the 50 greatest white sax players and the 100 greatest black sax players. They were basically two different circuits. You know, it was like Negro Leagues and Major Leagues. There was two different worlds of instruments and musicians and recording studios and touring opportunities. And there's a reason why a lot of it doesn't mingle, because financially it doesn't mingle. And America was still such a racist place, or America is such a racist place, that a white parent in Brunswick suburb isn't going to hire a black band. You know, no matter how much their kids beg. What are my friends and neighbors going to think if I, in 1960, hire a bunch of black kids to play that black jazz music at my event? And by 1960, of course, rock and roll and R&B are starting to become more prevalent. But I've said this before, like, there was no DJs to hire in the sense like how you hire me for a party or an event. In the 1930s, 40s, 50s, you hired a big band, white or black, to play the songs of the day in a danceable contemporary version that made them hipper and more sexual. That's what the whole black idea of jazz is in a lot of ways, is we're going to make songs people know, but make them danceable, sexual, so we can have a good time to this. We're not going to just play stuff no one knows. We're going to take songs you know, so you're still going to feel a part of it and invited in, but we're going to make them swing. You know, we're going to have fun with it, and we're going to put that pocket to it, and so that we're going to reduce some of it and give it a minimal little funkiness. And that's part of the joy of what this music was always about, was celebration. And let's have a good time tonight in spite of all this. And in 2020, we all got a little bit of some of that, all this. It's what a crazy year. I had the privilege of watching the new Borat film last night for the honor of Kazakhstan. And he takes a couple good shots, well-placed shots. But for the most part, he just hands somebody a shovel and says, "You want to dig a hole? Start talking." And boy, Americans love to dig holes. That's just something they're comfortable doing. It was a fun watch. You know, I'm sure it's not going to be for everybody. But he certainly has a way getting people to just put themselves in situations, you know, the Giuliani thing even. I don't want to get too far into it, but Sacha Baron Cohen's this intellectual fella. All the brashness and potty jokes aside, he's a smart fella, and he really knows how to pick at some of the open wounds and some of things we should be ashamed of. He has a way of going, why aren't you ashamed of that? it's pretty clever. First record I want to show you today is a Bethlehem 10-inch. And as I said in the last episode of T2F, Bethlehem 10-inches are a tough find. Some have been Japanese reissued, others have not. This one has not. This is number Paula Castle, number 36. I think it makes it to the second last Bethlehem 10-inch, because I think, if I recall, 37 and 38 aren't issued. And then 39 is Wigville, the 10-inch I showed you last time. Those last few 10-inches are really rare, it seems like, and didn't get reissued a lot. I think the Wigville one might have a Japanese one. I don't think this one does. And this one might have a Japanese reissue too. I can't remember. I think it does. But what a great cover. Another great Berg Goldblatt, the beautiful fountain, the green font. And to give some context to what I'm showing you there, this is way before the 7000 Prestige, the Blue Note 4 1500 series. This is 53, 54, 55. Bethlehem is doing some really outstanding artwork that's really ahead of the field at the time. Savoy's doing black and white photographs. Most labels out there aren't even going to be in the conversation. Riverside's doing little black and white line, 10 inches. Real simple, basic stuff. The Prestige 10-inch album covers are awful. Roost has a couple good ones by 55, 54. They start doing some good art. But Berg Goldblatt's doing some of that as well. Another record that took me a long time to find, and I think it's in part because it's the last record of his contract for Riverside, is Johnny Griffin's Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me, the great Duke Ellington song. I had found most of Griffin's records fairly easy on Riverside. They're out there, you know, $20 to $50, most of them. They're great records, each and every one of them. He does a lot of different things with Riverside. This was his last session at Riverside. And I know it's true in rock and roll, where when a band reaches the end of his contract with a label, and if the label is especially not interested in re-signing him, they will often just hardly promote or publicize or even print records. I know it happened to Neil Young before he left Geffen. He had some real issues there. But when Griffin records this session, it's going to be number 462, which means it also might be just after Riverside's faded away. It's with Buddy Montgomery, Wes's brother, and Monk Montgomery and Art Taylor's on this as well. So it's a nice quartet session. My gut tells me this could even be from 64, 63, but it was impossible for me to find it. It wasn't even like I could bid on it and lose it. I saw all his other records having multiple copies, and this one, I must have gone 6-8 months without finding one. And then I finally found one, number 462 Riverside, which is right around the end of the Riverside run before they go into bankruptcy. It's great stuff. It's Griffin doing what Griffin does, and that's never a bad thing in my book. A record I got probably 6 months ago, and I didn't even know how tough it was to find if I went to look for it. Because it was late enough in the Emarcy sequence where I had other priorities I was looking for. You know, there was all the fabulous Helen Merrill. All the great Helen Merrill stuff, Sarah Vaughan, Dinah Washington. There's all these great singers I was looking for and trying to collect their stuff on Emarcy. But eventually, as I started to fill Emarcy in further and further, getting all the Clifford Brown, Max Roach stuff, Cannonball Adderley. Now, there's a lot of great titles in Emarcy in the 36,000 series. And it was when I started getting near the end, I started looking for some of the titles I didn't know who they were. And you have to recall something that a lot of times when I was searching for records from a label, I would just go to Discogs or eBay and type the label in, LP, vinyl, Emarcy, and see what came up. When I would go to a seller's store and find a record I was looking for, I'm like, oh cool, there's that Cannonball record I want. Let's see what else this guy has on Prestige. I would just search that label. And sometimes I do a time frame. Other times I just see what popped, And that's how you start finding the rare Bethlehems, the rare Savoys, the stuff you don't even know what. You just search by label at these different stores or on eBay, see what pops up, see what's in your price range, and maybe bundle some stuff together. When I came to look for Thelma Grayson, I typed her name in, and when I saw the picture pop up, I knew I had never seen it. And I bet you I had searched for Emarcy 500 times. And this is, I believe, an imported copy. No, it says Chicago. But she's a great singer. Very tough record to come by. It's number 36096. So it's right at the end of that 36,000 series. And by this time it's probably 5960. And maybe 58, 59. And Emarcy's not got a lot left. By 6061, Emarcy's gone. And Mercury will use the name at times and stick it on a record, but Emarcy's pretty much phased out by 61. And everything just ends up being back on the Mercury parent label. And the jazz on Mercury is very sparse and intermittent. The jazz that was on Emarcy was nothing but great jazz. And so they're very different labels in that sense, but it also tells you something about the marketplace. Mercury was a business, and in the 50s it made sense to launch Emarcy, this jazz-only sequence of LPs, but by 1960-61, jazz had become such a small part of the marketplace that we're just going to put the few jazz titles we put out in our regular 26,000 Mercury series. And we lost something great with Mercury, but the markets didn't demand more. Tough record to find. Great singer. And a record I would, if you stumble on this, I would recommend you grab it. She got a bit of that Peggy Lee cheekiness. Another record that was very tough for me to find, well, again, they're all going to be that, is this fantastic Paul Gonsalves record. You can just feel the weight of that old Argo. Paul Gonsalves is one of the great saxophone players of the swing era. He, of course, earns his degree in the School of Ellington, and he's a very prominent member of Ellington's band, especially in the 50s. And everyone's going to know him primarily. His most famous moment was when he helped rebirth Ellington at Newport, and the great Paul Gonsalves plays chorus after chorus after chorus, and the audience got out of their seats. It was a song they were familiar with and knew, and they started dancing. And the Newport audiences at this point, jazz was changing. It wasn't danceable. It was more sophisticated. It was more, we're going to sit in our chairs and listen to these groups play these smaller combos and be impressed by their chops and their sophistication. And swing had kind of become a thing of the past. And Ellington was feeling kind of somewhat despondent even, like, why is my star dimming? And the Newport audiences blew up. They went out of their seats, they went crazy, and Gonsalves was just tearing it down. chorus after chorus after chorus, and the band's churning them on. The crowd's getting crazier. Ellington said it was a rebirth. He said he was born at Newport, which of course, he's only the history of modern music. But this Gonsalves LP, I should talk about real quick a little bit. Another really, really tough thing to find. I looked for it. Again, I knew who Gonsalves was, and that was a lot more than I could say about a lot of the Argo names when I started looking for that discography of early Argo. You know, there's only a few names, and you're gonna recognize right away. Like, oh, Sonny Stitt, okay. James Moody, okay. Al Hibbler, I know him. You know, Rex Roach has a record in there with Hank Mobley. But a lot of that stuff, you're like, who is this? Clark Terry has a record in there, you know, Ramsey Lewis, Ahmad Jamal. But a lot of the other names in between there, you're like, who's Chubby Jackson? Who is Dick Lane? Who is Pinky Winters? You don't know none of these names. I knew Paul Gonsalves. So he was one of the guys that I was searching for almost right away when I started searching for Argo. You know, and for all these different labels, and I would kind of go through periods where I'd look for this label. I had Blue Note finished 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago probably. And so the other labels I was slowly kind of filling in intermittently. But then I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I need to flesh those out too, to really have the knowledge to do a channel and to talk about it like I want to. And so I fleshed out Prestige and Riverside, and you start doing Savoy and Bethlehem, the West Coast labels, Chicago labels. You start filling all that detail in, Verve, Impulse, Atlantic, and you start with looking for titles you know. And so I'm looking for Gonsalves, and I searched Argo hundreds and hundreds of times, and I could never find this record for less than $300. And it was always just stratosphere expensive. And he's a great player. And part of the issue is, of course, that a lot of old Argos have never been reissued. And so there's no Japanese alternative, there's no European alternative. If you want this record, which is of Daddy-O Presents, which is one of the great Argo early promoter, producer guys, shout radio personality. If you want this record, you gotta find an old copy. And so that means even old copies in Germany or whatever, they're all in the hundreds of dollars. And I think I probably got this one, they probably wanted $125, $140, and I probably paid $75 for it, you know. And I probably bundled some other stuff with it in order to get that price. But it's a great session, it really cooks. And I think this is one of the records that kind of puts Argo on the map on some level. Clark Terry's on it, Jimmy Woods on the bass, Sam Woodgins on the drums, Willie Jones on the piano. So that's pretty much all Ellington alumni. And again, if you can find this for $100, grab it. Piano Door by Sanford Gold. That was some fantastic Paul Gonsalves as we were fading out. Piano Door is a 7000 series Prestige. I've shown this a few times in the deep dives. As I was going through the Prestige sequence, I always kind of want to focus on the early titles of a label, because I figure that's going to be the rarest, and I should look for it and see if there's a copy out there that someone doesn't know what it is and wants to get rid of it for cheap, or has been sitting on it for a long time. And that's what you got to hope with some of the early titles that aren't being sought after, but they're still very early and historically interesting. Those titles are the ones that are going to be sitting somewhere in a store for 2, 3, 4 years, waiting for someone like me to come along. And this is a record like that, Piano Door. It's a piano player by the name of Sanford Gold. He's a white cat. He plays on some pretty interesting records. He shows up as a sideman here and there, and I can't think off the top of my head where he shows up, but I've seen him on numerous sessions, a half dozen, not a great ton, but he does show up in a few places, and I think he plays with some singers as well. But it's a great cover. Beautiful stuff. Looks like it's probably on Central Park there. Rare Prestige. Again, due to its rareness and its OJC omission, this one, it's kind of up to the seller. He might realize there's none of these out there on Discogs and want $100 for it. but then there's gonna be the next seller who just wants to move inventory, and he sees like only 3 of these have ever sold. I'm gonna sell this for $40. And I think I paid about $25, $30 for this one actually, and I was thrilled because I looked for it forever. It was one of those things where you're searching prestige, and every once in a while you're like, okay, I still don't have that 7019. What is 7019? That's Sanford Gold. And you look at it, and you type it in once in a while. You're like, oh, there's nothing, no. And when you find it, you're like, oh, it's too expensive, you know. And so you're thrilled when you find those little pieces like that. Another fantastic Bethlehem 10-inch, and this is what I've showcased numerous times in numerous episodes, is this fantastic Charlie Mariano record. And Bethlehem 10 inches are rare beasts, and Mariano's more sought after than a lot of Mariano's more sought after than a lot of the Bethlehem stuff is. And his 2 12-inch records are fantastic, but this 10-inch one with the X-ray photo of the saxophone, Burt Goldblatt, this is just fantastic stuff. I believe Stu Williamson's on it. I think Claude Williamson's on it. Frank Rosalino's on the trombone, Max Bennett and Stan Levy, and that's that great West Coast backing group that wasn't getting any leadership roles at Pacific or Contemporary or Capitol, but they were playing on sessions on all those labels all the time. And Bethlehem said, you know what, let's start a West Coast affiliate and let's record all those great West Coast jazz cats that aren't getting leadership roles. And that's all those guys I just let off, all got records. There's more than that as well. Conti Condoli, and there's a lot of great West Coast Bethlehem. I've talked about it numerous times over the years. And if you are looking for some great white, hard-driving, modern post-bop, that Bethlehem young kids that are aggressive, fueled, feeling it, man. They're feeling it. You can't go wrong with any of those records by those cats. Stu Williamson's a great trumpet player. Conti Condoli's a great trumpet player. Rosalino's a great trombone player. Max Bennett's a great bass player. Stan Levy's a great drummer. It's that whole crew. It's top mark. And sometimes you listen to white jazz and you can tell right away, like, oh, these are white cats. They're just playing kind of more with less fire. They're playing equal tempo, but it feels more even keel, less tension. These cats play with a pretty good degree of tension and aggression that you could mistake for a bunch of angry young black kids. And that's a great measurement of a guy's ability to play jazz. You know, hip-hop too, there was some hip-hop artists that were white that could really emulate the black experience and have struggle of their own to talk about. And then there's some white cats that were just impersonating the music and making money on it. And the difference between Eminem and Vanilla Ice, you know, that same paradigm exists in jazz. How can it not? There's some white cats that are just going through the motions playing jazz. It's a way to make a buck. And there's some white cats out there who are serious about it, you know, dead serious about it. And next record I'm going to show you here is this fantastic Howard McGhee record. Another Bethlehem, but this is the other end of the Bethlehem story. By the end of 1960, Bethlehem's pretty much on the ropes. King has already bought them, I believe, in 58 or 9, and he lets them kind of exist on their own with Gus Wilde still being there for a couple of years. But by 60, Wilde's done, and at that point, King just uses the Bethlehem logo to put out vault jazz stuff that they're not really promoting that tough and don't really care about. Let's issue that old Lockjaw Davis session we got from back in the King Federal days. It didn't sell very good back in 55, but Lockjaw's doing pretty good on Prestige right now. So let's reissue that now under the Bethlehem imprint, and people will think it's some new Lockjaw Davis thing. And that's how the industry works a lot. There's a lot of that happening all the time. But McGhee is one of the great founders of the bebop sound. He's very important in the early 50s, late 40s. He's a part of playing with all the greats. You know, the Parkers and the Gillespies and the Monks. He's in that whole scene. And he's a very integral part of bebop. And he's a very lyrical player. He's one of the most forgotten guys of that time. And a young Miles Davis who didn't really play or have a lot of chops at that point ascends to royalty, and McGhee kind of struggles in obscurity throughout the 50s and the early 60s. It's not to say he doesn't do some fantastic records. He has 3 records on Bethlehem, 2 in the BCP series, which are like 56, 57 that are outstanding. Life's a Bowl of Cherries, and then Howard McGhee's Returns, maybe. Those are both great. But then he goes to contemporary and does some stuff there, and he has titles on United Artists that are great. But this one comes out probably 60, 61, and it's a great record. And I just showed this on my Facebook group, and got a lot of comments on it there. But Walter Bolden, Tommy Flanagan, Ron Carter as a young man, Roland Alexander on the tenor, Pep Adams on the baritone, Benny Green on the trombone, and Howard McGhee on the trumpet. So it's a pretty all-star session in a lot of ways. Great cover, actually. And the first 6 months I looked for this, again, it's a Bethlehem record who I knew the artist. A lot of these Bethlehem names I don't know, but I know the Howard McGhee guy, so I'm going to look for that guy more than the other guys. And I looked and I looked and I looked and I could not find one. And then I finally found one in California, and the guy wanted like $150 for it, maybe more. And I was like, I guess I'm not going to do that. I made him an offer or 2. I tried to bundle a bunch of stuff to get it, and he just had too much into it, he said, to do it. And so I passed it up. And then one day, after receiving a message from my California guy that he wasn't going to do it, I looked again, and there was one on eBay from Texas for $40. And I was like, swoop! And it's actually in great shape. The cover's got a little wear to it, but it's older than me, and hopefully it'll live as long as I do, if not longer. So, great stuff. Probably took me a year to track this one down. And it's one of the ones I was really excited when I finally got it. And I was patient, and I got it at a good price. On the Dawn label now is another record that I searched and searched for, and this type of jazz I love. The Dawn Bethlehem gal singers are great for my brunch gigs. You know, I just want to play something light with a spritzer and a side of cucumber, and I want it to be light, and I want it to be darling, and I need it to have little fluffy clouds in the sky. I want it to be buoyant, brilliant. And this Donna Brooks record is the one Dawn record where I just couldn't find originals of it. I looked and I looked, and I think I saw one once for a couple $100, and I'm like, damn. So it was obviously pretty rare, and it's Dawn number 1105, which makes it their 5th issue. There was no 1100, so that throws me for a loop sometimes. If there's 1100, I'm like, that's 6, not 5. But I can't tell you too much about her. I don't think I have her on any other label either, but which would mean that if I tell you I don't have her on any other label, that means she doesn't make any other records on any other major jazz labels. That 20-25 label that I'm pretty familiar with, if I get into an artist on any of those labels, I'm going to look for everything else they did on those major labels just to fill out or flesh out their careers. And so that means if I'm missing records by artists, as of these hundreds of artists I talk about, it's going to be something that's very small and some label that has very little spread or knowledge, and it's probably going to be minimal in importance of the canon. But it's a great record, super fun. I finally settled for a Spanish Fresh Sounds copy, and they're out there in Europe, especially the Fresh Sounds of this, but I didn't want to spring for that because of shipping. And then finally one of these showed up on the East Coast that was Fresh Sounds, $25 I think. And plus shipping, I'm still like, man, $30 for this. I don't know if I'm going to like it. And I love it. It's fantastic. It's right where you want for certain moods. When you're serving a lovely brunch, when you have a cafe with a sidewalk and a Vespa, you can play this. I don't know if there's anyone notable on the band or even listed. Alex Smith, who does some stuff on Dawn or Bethlehem. I mean, it's probably Dawn. Paul Worthington on the bass and Angelo Paoli on the drums. So pretty unknown band, but that's part of the story of jazz. There's thousands of guys out there that are playing that can play. Just because we don't know them doesn't mean they ain't somebody. And we've only chosen to remember the small percentage of it. Now, that's a lot of what my Messiah is about. Let's remember this whole era. Probably the toughest impulse for me to find was this Danny Richmond record. And Danny Richmond was Charles Mingus' right-hand guy. And Mingus was a difficult guy to work with. And a lot of guys like Jimmy Knepper and just couldn't stand being around him. He got into fist fights, he pulled guns on people. He was just a really difficult personality that rubbed certain people really wrong. If I recall, doesn't Jackie McLean have an issue with Mingus as well? I don't recall for sure, but Danny Richmond was a great drummer, and he plays pretty much with Mingus throughout the 60s. Impulse gives him this record, and it's probably due to Mingus making those 3 records at Impulse himself. And it doesn't give you much of an inkling of what Mingus was about. The soup can cover is pretty fantastic. Jackie Byard's on this. Jimmy Rainey's on the guitar. Cecil McBee is on the bass. And then Willie Bobo and Victor Pantoja on the Latin percussion. Toot Steelman shows up as well, looks like, on some of it, which is pretty fantastic. He's on the John Kennedy Memory Waltz. Nice. So he's on a couple other tracks too. So that's Danny Richmond. Mingus swore by him, and in part because I think Mingus trusted him that he would handle him. His personality. It's interesting hearing Richmond do this, because it's kind of this Latin inflected. The Latin percussion is really adding an element. The guitar, it doesn't sound necessarily like what you'd expect from a Mingus album, but it also tells you that some of what Mingus was doing was being kept in the pocket by Richmond, and Richmond took some of the stuff that Mingus was doing and said, this is how I would have kind of done it, like the Spanish moods, Tijuana kind of stuff. He's saying, this is how I hear some of this stuff. It's actually a really fun record, and again, when I was searching the Impulse, they were the second label that I kind of completed, and by I say complete, I have the first 150, and after that, it's so not my music anymore. I don't really care. I have numerous titles after 150, but I haven't filled it in, because a lot of it's very much avant-garde stuff that I won't listen to anymore. But a great cover, really tough to find. It's number 198, sorry, and it was right around 100. And this one took me a long time to find. And it's one of those records that is annoyingly something I recall from my days shopping that I'd see in record stores from time to time, but not knowing what it was. And also, it probably being Byard's beautiful right there. It also was probably even expensive in the 90s when I would see it. I know going into Jaime's and the Record Co-op and some of those places, I remember seeing this record on end caps or on the display racks. 10, 12, 14 bucks then, which was a lot for a used record, especially for a used record by a guy you never heard of or didn't know. You know, being Impulse, I would probably taken a chance on it if it was 5, 6, 8 bucks. But in those days, $14 for a record seemed like a lot. And boy, if I could go back now and buy all the $14 records I saw in 1995, if you were 15 bucks in 1995 as a used piece of vinyl, you were something of value. That's probably worth 150 bucks now. The number of records that have shot through the roof like that, it's pretty insane. Another great Bethlehem 10-inch. I Only Have Eyes for Shoe. Eddie Schulman, great white player. If I recall, he ends up like in Hollywood working in the bands there for a long time, in the films and the orchestras, doing soundtracks and stuff by the 60s and 70s. But he makes a couple of great jazz records, and this Bethlehem one is definitely one of them. And you can see him in the eyes of the owl. You can look in there closer, you see there he is. And again, it's one of those great Burt Goldblatt covers. The purple tinted owl. I Only Have Eyes for Shoe. Tough to find. And I think I got this one from England. And I'm always hesitant to buy it from overseas because you got to factor in that $25, $30 shipping. And so there's that recognition that you have that a $40 record here with $5 shipping is a better deal than a $20 record from England with $30 shipping. So you also have to kind of do that math. And I couldn't find a domestic copy for under $200. There's only a few of them out there at the time. And I didn't want the Japanese, I wanted the original on this one. And this guy from England had one, and he was making an offer, which kind of told me he probably had it for a while. And I think the make an offer thing is one of two things. Either a seller's had something for a long time, it's not selling at the price he put on it, or some sellers will make almost everything make an offer, but add 30% to what they're asking, so that they're going to already be fine with you taking 30% off. You know, they're going to say make an offer $8.99, but they'd be fine with $6 right now as a buy it now. So you got to kind of factor all that stuff in your head. And this isn't something that he has dozens of copies of, you know that. So if he has a buy it or make an offer on it now, even at that high price, it means he's probably willing to move it. And so you don't just want to make an offer. You want to send a little message to communicate a little bit. Just be personable, you know. Maybe tell them a little story about what you're collecting and why. I think a lot of sellers like to know the personality behind who they're selling to. And I think, believe it or not, a lot of sellers want to know what's going to a collector and not to another seller. If you are just going to take the record I give you a great deal on, and you're just going to put it back on eBay and sell it for twice that, I'm not sure I want to sell it to you. I'll just sell it for twice that myself. But if a seller knows that it's going to a guy who's been looking for it for a long time, and he's a collector who loves the music or loves the art or whatever, I think that connection to the art is always going to impact the seller some, and some sellers more so than others, you know. But I think I ended up paying only like $18-20 because there's some issues with the cover, pretty minimal. You know, I think it was a little maybe water damage on the back, was it? No, it's just some tape. But the seller, I think I got $18-20 plus the shipping, so it probably ended up being around $40. But it's a fantastic little, I think it's East Coast, Bethlehem. And that's always kind of important to remember which coast was it recorded on, because they'll tell you who's playing on it. Another record that was really tough for me to find was this McGhee record. And I'm not sure if it's McGhee or Matthew G. I don't know. I've never heard it said anywhere, and anybody I've asked hasn't known. And this is another case of a guy I didn't really know the name of, but as I started to fill in the Riverside discography, there very early on in the 200s was this trombone player. And it's right around the Ernie Henry, the first Bill Evans. It's right as Riverside started doing some good stuff. And so that kind of had my interest peaked. I'm like, 217 to 221. And so it's right as I said, Riverside starting to really start to do some pretty consistent titles. And I couldn't find it online. And it was one of those things where I was searching Riverside. I remember Google imaging and see the cover and I'm like, I've never seen that before. Which is something I often do. If I look for something on eBay or Discogs and I can't even find it, I want to see the cover. I'm like, oh, I've seen that before. At least you know. And this one I've never seen the cover before. And it's got hi-fi right there in the bell, which is kind of cool. It's a great band if I recall. Ernie Henry's on this, Wilbur Ware, Art Taylor, Cecil Payne, Joe Knight, Frank Foster, Kenny Dorham's on the onside too. So it's great stuff. The Matthew Gee All-Stars, very modern. He's a great player we don't really know much about. One of those trombone players we kind of forgot about. I do a series on the trombone players about 6-8 months ago, and he's one of the great players that really kind of slips through the cracks. Henry's great on this. Old Riverside, you really can't go wrong. Anything Prestige, Riverside, Blue Note is going to be outstanding. Another record I want to show you real quick is another Dawn record. When I first started getting into Dawn with the Zoot Sims and the Les Modes records, I looked at their discography, and a lot of their labels have that in there, where you have the other releases on the label. And I also got this collection pretty easy. It was called Critics' Choice, maybe, that had a bunch of the covers on the front of the cover, and it was a sampler from all those records. And so you look at all those album covers, and like, wow, there's some cool titles in there, some cool artists, but also some cool art. And this one was one of the ones that Paul Kinneshay as well really jumps out at me. But this, our Al Cohn record, the cover was just like, oh, I love that. I love that. And Al Cohn has two sides to him. He's got the side where he's kind of battling with Zoot Sims, and he's a real blustery post-modern player. But there's also this kind of smoky alleyway blues to him at times that is fantastic. Gorgeous. And the cover's outstanding. The playing is beautiful. If I recall, the band's pretty great as well. Hank Jones, O.C. Johnson, Milt Hinton, Frank Rehak. Frank Rehak on trombone, Milt Hinton on the bass, O.C. Johnson on the drums, and Hank Jones on the piano. That's royalty. That's huge. And you have that Rehak trombone giving that little bit of baritone lower range, along with the great tenor of Al Cohn. Al Cohn's a great player. I just love his narratives, and he's just a storyteller. You know, he's a character. Al really does this thing along with Zoot Sims, two of my favorite white tenor players. Just great. But it was tough to find. And I knew with the cover it was going to be tough to find. And it's Dawn number 1110. And I'm like, I really want that though. It's so cool. It's so hip. It's so everything I love about the 50s. And I was in Chicago, and I love to go to Chicago to buy records. And there's some great record stores up there: Reckless Records, Bob's Jazz Blues Mart, Dusty Groove. There's some great record stores in Chicago. There really is. And there's also a huge population, and also a big black population. All those affects what's in your bins. You know, Minneapolis in the 50s and 60s, the black population was very small in the Twin Cities, and it starts to really explode in the 70s and 80s as the blacks were migrating from Milwaukee and from Rockford and from Chicago up to the Twin Cities looking for jobs and employment opportunities. But in the 50s and 60s, the black population was very small here. And that means a lot of the soul records, the jazz records from that era are pretty tough to find here. You go to Chicago, where there was a huge black population, a huge poor population, a huge population period. There tends to be a ton more stuff out there. And a lot of the titles I'm looking for at this point are those in between the crack titles. So I would go to Chicago and just come home with 10 Emarcys, 12 Argos, some cool Dawns, some prestige titles. And a lot of them would be pretty affordable too. A place like Reckless will just keep pricing their records down the longer they stay in inventory. Every week they go down. So I remember finding some records there for $2-3. I'm like, oh my God, this is a record that goes for $50 online. Cool. But the demand isn't always there, and they want to move inventory. But Al Cohn, Dawn, this was on the shelf. And actually I found, as I went to the recent arrival jazz section, I found a reissue that had just come out. I don't know if it was Fresh Sounds, but there's a reissue of this out there right now that's actually pretty affordable. I'm like, oh sweet, I'll never find an original of this. I guess I'll take this. So I had this original in my hand with a stack of records like, you know, like that. And as I go in near to the checkout counter, I look up on the wall. Oh my God, they got another copy of that up there. And I look closer, I'm like, wait a second, it's a different price. And $29.99 is what they wanted for this, for an original, beautiful, Dawn, clean, gorgeous pressing. And it was really one of the highlights of my trip, was finding this absolutely beautiful record. The last thing I'm going to show you today is another Argo record, and this is a case of a record that when I started looking for it, Discogs didn't even have it listed. And I could Google image it and see the cover. I would go to Discogs and search Argo number 615 and nothing would pop up. And I would go to eBay and there was nothing. And the only thing you would ever get was a couple 7 inches by this guy and see this one quite a lot, which was Dick Lane Without Sauce, number 605. And it's the fifth release, in the Argo discography. It comes right after the Pinky Winters, and it's got the cool old Argo ship logo label. And this one's not as hard to find. It's out there. So I got this one pretty quickly, and I think it was under $10. Because again, Dick Lane, who was looking for it, but it's great old Argo. And so I figured the second one would be easy to find too, and not the case. Swinging Down the Lane, 615, is one of the rarest records I've had to look for. And it took me a long time to track down a copy. And I think the first one I found, believe it or not, was on Amazon. Some of the stuff swings more than others. Some of it's a little schmaltzy candy-like. Again, Argo's run by the Chess Brothers in Chicago, so they're very black heavy, but they probably wanted to sell some records to white folks. It almost looks like Thelma Grayson, which I don't think it is, but this second one, couldn't find it. Went on Amazon, there was a guy who had one for $100, and we went back and forth on it a couple times, and I think I talked him down to 60 for it, but it was still with a hesitation, and I was like, I don't know if he wasn't sure he wanted to part with it for that, and I wasn't sure I wanted to spend 60 for it. I was like, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. So I waited, and eventually one popped up for $24, and it's pristine, hardly played, beautiful old crisp Argo logos, got the stars on the side there. It's got a bit of that Glenn Miller-esque pop vocal part, but it's also swinging a little bit underneath there. And so I wouldn't recommend this to any beginner jazz collection or any guy who wants just hard driving hard bop and angry black music. This is more of a history piece. And I want to have the complete discography of all these labels just to have that as my degree. And that's what my label collections are. They're my understanding. They're my footing. This is where I speak from. This is my education. And to have all those labels' discography is almost completed, some more so than others. But I would say 90% of the great labels stuff from that era. And this is a fun piece to find. And I would say if you stumble on it in a record store for $5, which is where I think most record stores would put something like this, $5 to $20 in a record store environment. Online, you have that wild card of someone from Sweden looking for it, so you got to put a $100 price on it. In a store, you don't do that. You make it more accommodating to a consumer to grab it. And so I bet you can find this in stores once in a while for $15, $20. And I would grab it because it's fun. And I would grab it because it's rare. It's a rare piece. And honestly, almost anything Argo under $620 is a pretty rare piece. And a lot of it's never been reissued. So it's definitely more targeting a white audience, but they're not fools. They know that 80% of the population is white, and most of the record-buying consumers are white. And so they made records that were going to cross over. But again, they're still great players. Some great guitar right there. The vocal harmonies are fun. They're very white, and how it's presented even sounds very white. But as a piece of history, a piece of the collection, it was a fun find. And like I said, it took me a long time to find it. And I don't know if Discogs even has one listed now, number 615 Argo. And there's one more Argo I'm looking for. Cesar, man, I can't think of his name now. Cesar Giovannini. Holiday on the Riviera. Sounds like some Italian fella playing piano jazz tracks. I think it's solo piano stuff. It's number 647 or 6 in there somewhere. And I only search for it sporadically once in a while. It's never popped up when I searched Argo. I did have a chance to bid on one a few weeks ago and lost it. I bid low. Didn't think anybody else was going to be looking at it. But that's the one Argo, and that's also really rare. Discogs has never sold one. So there's some really rare Argo titles. So I'm going to wrap that up today. It was a fun episode. And we're at, 40 minutes right now? Yeah, it's pretty good length already. Anyway, I appreciate y'all. Check out my Patreon page. Make a pledge. There's some cool bonus material there if you want. And also, There's a great merchandise Teespring link in the comments, in the description, pardon me, where you can get stuff for my jazz Facebook page, stuff for the channel here, different jazz shepherd logos and looks. My friend Sven Van Hooydonk designed a lot of it. Please support the channel and support my family, and grab some merch if you have the inkling to do so. Appreciate you all. Stay safe.